My entitled sister-in-law demands I invite her bully son to my son's birthday party, then spirals when I refuse to put my son in harm's way. Hey everyone, I'm a 37-year-old woman and have been married for 9 years. My husband Harry is 40, and I also have a 7-year-old son, Nate. Harry's sister Kim also has a son around the same age as Nate. Her son Dean and my son used to be close, and we used to have playdates almost every other day, until recently. For the past couple of months, Nate has been telling me that Dean is bullying him at school. Both of them go to the same school and used to be in the same class too. But after my son complained about being bullied and made fun of by Dean, I spoke to their principal and had his class changed. Both of them are in 2nd grade, and I tried everything to fix the situation before taking that step. I had spoken to Kim about the bullying, but she laughed it off and said that the boys were just being boys and that they'd get over it. My son's a rough and tumble little boy too, so if he was actually complaining about being constantly bullied by Dean, then I believe that there was something wrong and it wasn't just playing rough. When talking to Kim didn't work, I spoke to his teacher and had them separated. Since then, Kim and I haven't exactly been on good terms, and I avoid her at family gatherings because I don't want to speak to her. Her son is very unruly and rude and has absolutely no idea how to behave in public, and he's just 7, so things must be pretty bad, you guys can imagine. I don't think he's a good influence on my son, so I've stopped them from hanging out together and have told Nate to keep a distance from his cousin. He's okay with it because he was getting bullied, and he didn't get along with his cousin anymore. Kim was either oblivious to all of this, or she just didn't want to acknowledge that there was something wrong with the way her son had been behaving recently. This might also have something to do with Kim's recent breakup, I'm not sure though. She was dumped by her boyfriend of 3 years just 6 months ago, but none of us know the reason why that happened. She's been weird ever since that happened. It seems like she's very detached from everyone now and only cares about herself, not even her son. She'd never married Dean's father, and they had broken up within a year of Dean's birth, but he had continued to co-parent their kid. He lives nearby, so Dean can continue to go to the same school, and he and Kim can easily take turns looking after Dean. As far as I know, they're not exactly on good terms, but they're not on bad terms either. He's not really close to the family, so we don't see the guy unless it's Dean's birthday that's being celebrated or Hera at Kim's house, which is a holiday that she hosts every year. That's the only time we see the guy, and he seems like a nice person who loves his son. At Dean's last birthday, which was 3 months ago, a couple of days. Before Nate and Dean were separated in school, he seemed very upset with Kim over something, but we didn't know what it was. I did guess that it must have been over Dean, since he'd been behaving badly at the party as well, but Kim was acting like there was nothing wrong with the way he'd been acting. I didn't even want to go to that party, and neither did Nate because of Dean's behavior. But my husband insisted, so we did end up going. I didn't want us to fight because of that, and I figured just making an appearance would have been enough. So we did just that and came back home, and this way everyone was happy. A few weeks after that, Nate had his class changed, and after that, Kim and I didn't meet or speak to each other one-on-one. A few days ago, I sent out invitations to a lot of moms from Nate's group because Nate was celebrating his birthday in a couple of days. I did not invite Kim and her son because Nate didn't want Dean to be there, and neither did I. But when Kim found out that I hadn't invited her but a lot of other kids had been invited, she was furious and called me to demand an explanation and to make sure her son got invited. I told her the real reason why her son wasn't invited and didn't mince my words because I thought she'd been letting her son run free and behave in a really awful way. I could understand that she'd just been through a bad breakup, but that was really no excuse to let her son be so undisciplined. Even if she believed it was all right, she could let that behavior remain confined to her own life and household, but I wasn't going to force my son and I to be a part of that. Dean had bullied Nate enough to make him not want to be around him at all, and to me, my son's well-being was more important than maintaining relationships. She was very angry and said a lot of horrible things about me and my son and then hung up. I didn't think much of it because I knew an outburst like this was bound to happen, and didn't make much of a difference to me if she didn't talk to me over this since we weren't really that close anyway. After she refused to raise her son better, I'd completely cut her off in my head. Out of love for my husband, I'd still tried to have a cordial relationship with her and attended her son's birthday. But it had been 3 months since that, and her son's behavior had only gotten worse. So now I didn't see any reason for us to force ourselves or our sons to be friends when they so clearly didn't get along with each other. My husband wasn't happy about this when he found out, but he also didn't say anything about it. Nate's birthday is coming up in 4 days, and after that phone call, Kim didn't try to talk to me about the birthday invitation. Then, 2 days ago, I had to attend a wedding, but it was out of town, so I had to stay overnight. After the wedding, my husband told me that he couldn't attend because he was busy with work, and Nate didn't want to go since he would have to skip 1 day of school, which he didn't want to do, so it was just me attending. It was a 4-hour drive to the location, and the wedding and after-party were all wrapped by 11. I called my husband once I got to the hotel to check up on him and Nate, but to my surprise, my husband told me that Nate wasn't there. I didn't understand what he was talking about because it was really late at night, so I obviously expected my son to be at home. I asked him where he was, and he told me that Nate was with Kim, which shocked me because I'd made it very clear that I didn't want her or her son around Nate at all. Not because of any personal issues, but mostly because Nate didn't want to be around them. Once I got over the shock, I snapped and asked my husband to get him back home right that instant. But he told me that I was overreacting and that they're just kids, so they could sort it out if they just had one sleepover together. Kim had apparently come by to pick my son up from our house to take him home, and my husband had let her because he thought that it was totally fine just because Kim was family. He believed that Nate had to toughen up and learn how to be friends with his cousin instead of running away like a baby. I hung up on my husband because he was talking crazy and decided to call my parents so they could go over to Kim's house and bring Nate back to their own house where he'd stay until I came back the next day. I also called the cops, who got CPS involved, and they went along with my parents to bring Nate back home. I don't know what went down there exactly, but what I did find out from my parents later on was that Nate was very upset and had definitely been crying a lot. He'd even refused to have dinner at Kim's house because of some things that Dean had said about me, which he'd undoubtedly heard from his mother. So she had sent my son to sleep without any dinner. He was glad to be out of there and go home with my parents. I didn't rest until I was sure that he was with my parents, and even then, I was shaking like a leaf because of how overwhelming this experience had been for me. I started my drive back home as soon as my son was safe with my parents, and I told the cops that I wanted to press charges against Kim and my husband. I had to be present in person for that, so I left the hotel at around 11:30 and headed straight to my parents' house. Once I'd seen my son in person and made sure he was okay, I headed over to the police station and pressed charges against both my husband and his sister. They'd been detained for a day but had been released afterwards, and they'd have to stay in the state until the charges against them had been dropped or they were acquitted. I think they'd been let off pretty easily given the seriousness of what they'd done, because essentially Kim had taken my child away from his home without my approval, and it was absolutely not okay. Maybe he wasn't physically hurt, but he was emotionally really distressed and didn't even want to go to school today because he thought he'd have to come across Kim or Dean, and that kid would end up bullying him again. There had been a pattern of roughhousing and playing rough, but this was different, and it needed to end. If a 7-year-old is afraid of another kid to the point of being terrified to even see him, then there's certainly something very strange about that. I didn't let my son go to school, and I've decided to file for a divorce and for custody of Nate because I don't think my husband is capable of handling a child if he's willing to put family over his own kid's mental and emotional health. He didn't even apologize to me, but as soon as he got his phone back, he texted me to tell me that what I'd done was really disgusting and that he didn't want to see me because I was not fit to be a mother. He said I'd raise a sensitive girl instead of a son, and he wasn't on board with it. So now I could either come back to him and raise Nate on his terms, or I'd have to fight him for custody. I didn't even respond to that message, but a couple of hours ago I received another message from him saying that Kim was in the hospital because of me. Apparently, he said that because of my overreaction the other day, Kim's ex had decided to file for full custody of Dean and had even come by to take him away because he believed that she wasn't capable of raising him anymore. She couldn't even stop him because he'd come with CPS, and since she was already facing charges for what she'd done with Nate, things weren't looking too good for her. So Dean was removed from her custody. She tried to deal with the situation by having a temper tantrum once they'd left, and ended up smashing a lot of things in her house in a fit of rage. One of those things had been her glass coffee table, and when she'd smashed it, it had shattered, and glass shards were all over the floor, which is how she'd injured herself. Now, my husband was blaming me for all of this because my actions had triggered this behavior. And even though I'd known that she was going through a breakup, I'd still called the cops on them for something petty, despite knowing that Kim was unstable right now. He's even called me a homewrecker because I've not only ruined my own marriage, he's also holding me responsible for breaking Kim's family apart. Which doesn't make sense because she and her ex were never even married or anything. I don't understand what to think right now. ATA for reporting my husband and his sister to CPS after he let her take our son to her house to bond with her son, who bullies and scares my son. Update 1. Hey you guys, thank you so much for the overwhelming response I got here. It was nice to have people on my side because everyone else, apart from my parents, is certainly not on my side right now. Everyone's upset that Kim injured herself, and she even ended up in a rehabilitation center because she had a complete mental breakdown. I don't understand why his family, and even some of our friends, are blaming me for all of this, because if anything, the violent episode that she had just proves that she's not fit to raise a child, at least not right now. This could have just as easily happened while her son was inside the house with her, and then he would have been in danger as well. So, I probably did everyone a favor. But mostly, people have accused me of overreacting and being too sensitive. I mean, how was I too sensitive? The woman had literally taken my kid away from home, and my husband had let her. He then even tried to act like it was okay, even though he knew how much Nate didn't like to be in the company of his cousin. I only called the cops because my husband refused to care for his son, and obviously someone had to. The kid's not even 10 yet. There's also the fact that Kim didn't find it necessary to discipline her own child at any point. But because Nate was under stress and was very upset, she thought it would be appropriate to send him to bed without dinner, just because he was sad and wanted to go home. And nobody seems to think that there's anything wrong with what she did, just because she had a mental breakdown and ended up in the psych ward. It just seems really unfair to me that everyone's blaming me for what she did, even though I had no part to play in it. If she was under so much distress, then she really should have sought professional help earlier. But she didn't, and I don't understand how that's my fault. I didn't intend to create such a chain reaction of bad things to happen to Kim. I was just trying to protect my son. I don't understand why that's so hard for certain people to accept. I've already been feeling really upset about the divorce that's going to take place, and this is certainly not helping my situation. I feel like I just had to vent and let all these feelings out somewhere, so I'm treating Reddit as my journal right now. I need a lot of mental strength to get through this because what happened with Kim was bad, and I do feel sorry for her. But I don't think lashing out at me is the right move, like most of my friends and my husband's relatives seem to think it is. My only solace is that at least Nate is happy, and he's even resumed going back to school now. He's happy now that Dean's father has taken Dean away so they can start afresh. They've moved a few blocks away, and Dean's going to another school now, from what I heard from a couple of the mothers who keep in touch with the faculty. It's not ethical to gossip about the parents, but this is the first time that the gossip has been any help to me, so I'm thankful. Nate's back to school again, and as for the divorce and custody, I've already filed for divorce and for custody. My husband's yet to be served, but I'm sure that when he is, he's not going to let this go without a fight. I've already told my lawyer to take a look at our finances because 9 years is a long time, and I don't want him to screw me over, which he might. Try to do now that he and his family suddenly hate me. I can't say this is coming as a surprise. I'd always known that he was fiercely loyal and protective of his family, but I really had never imagined that he would pick them even over us. I don't understand how he can just treat me like this after almost a decade of being together. I'm kicking myself for not letting him go the second he showed the first signs of wanting Nate and Dean to still be friends. Even after our son was being bullied. I should never have attended that damn birthday party with my son and shouldn't have dropped that fight so easily. Then maybe we could have at least ended our marriage without so much drama. But unfortunately, I thought about giving him a second chance and well, look where that landed me. Update 2. Hey guys. So today my husband responded to the divorce petition, and he isn't contesting it, which is a relief because I don't think I would have been able to handle the stress of that mentally. But he's not ready to give up custody of Nate yet, so that's going to be a problem. My lawyer and I did see this coming, and we prepared for it, so we're hoping it works out well for us. And I think it will, because after what my husband did, I don't think any judge would want Nate to remain in his custody. He also hasn't visited Nate or me ever since I left, and I've been living with my parents for a while now. He hasn't even contacted me to check up on how Nate has been doing, which is kind of surprising since he wants custody of his son, but he can't be bothered to ask how the same kid is doing. It's funny, but since it works in my favor, I'm cool with it. Nate has been asking about his father, and it's going to be tough breaking the news to him, but I'll have to do it at some point. I wasn't strong enough to do it so far, but now that I'm going through with the divorce, it feels a lot more real, and I know I'll have to let the poor guy know that his dad probably won't be around the way he used to be. I know my son's going to be just fine with me, but it still feels awful because he's still just really young and small. It breaks my heart, and I'm hoping that the love from his grandparents, and me of course, can help him feel better. But nothing ever fills the void of a father figure. I know that, and I'm really upset that I'm going to have to put my son through that. My parents have been supportive and have been taking care of Nate, and I guess it helps because they're both retired now and don't have much to do around the house. This keeps all of them occupied, and I can focus on the mediation process and my work without constantly worrying about whether Nate's emotional needs are being met or not. I mean, I do play with him and talk to him every night for about an hour before I tuck him into bed, but I constantly keep feeling guilty. Like that's not enough for him. Even though he's been really brave and hasn't complained about it even once. I just worry about whether I'm being a good mom or not, and I really hope that I am because otherwise, I don't know who I am. Update 3. This is the night before the first mediation session for the custody case. It's around 3 in the morning right now, and I'm shivering, even though it's a summer night and relatively warm because of what my psychotic, crazy, immoral, soon-to-be ex-husband just did. It started when Nate and I were just about to go to bed at around 9:30. Someone rang the doorbell, and my dad was soon in our room telling me to come downstairs because my husband was at the door. He didn't understand what was going on, and neither did I. I told him that I didn't want to speak to my husband, so he needed to go away. My dad said that he seemed totally out of sorts and suspected that he was either really drunk or on drugs. He asked me if I wanted to call the police. Before I could even answer, I heard my husband screaming out my name and then yelling out expletives directed towards me. I freaked out a little, and so did Nate. So I told my dad to call the police immediately. We'd hardly even dialed when we heard the sound of smashing glass from downstairs, followed by my husband laughing loudly, and then the sound of a car pulling out, which meant that he'd left. My mother had already fallen asleep before my dad showed up, but as soon as she heard the sound of the glass breaking, she rushed upstairs to check on me. Thankfully, all of us are unharmed, but we were all really traumatized and didn't dare to move or do anything until we were sure that he wasn't loitering around anymore. We'd heard the car drive away, but we still couldn't believe that this was happening, and were scared of even breathing too loudly. When we went down to check the damage, we realized that the psycho had thrown one of the potted plants my mom keeps outside for decoration into the house through the glass window in the living room. There was glass all over the floor. After that, we wasted no time in calling the cops and pressing charges against him for destruction of property and also harassment. It turned out he had been drinking and celebrating that he had finally managed to get rid of me with his family in the house that we had lived in for so long. It was his family's bright idea to go to my house the night before the first mediation meeting to mess with me a little bit. Of course, they hadn't seen this coming, and when we came face to face at the police station, his mother was practically begging me to let this one incident slide and claiming that it was just a prank. It took me a lot of restraint, but I managed to ignore her altogether and came back home. It's been a couple of hours since, but I still haven't been able to bring myself to process any of this. It feels weird that the guy who had been the love of my life for so many years is even capable of doing something as nasty and deranged as this. Nate, thankfully, had fallen asleep, but even he was very traumatized, and kept asking if that was his father's voice that he'd heard. I didn't know how to answer that, so I just didn't say anything, and I think it's better off that way. He doesn't need to know any of this right now, he can just be a kid. I'm still in shock, but I've told my lawyer what happened. Since I don't believe my husband will be showing up for our meeting with the mediator tomorrow, I'll be filing a restraining order against him first thing in the morning. Update 4. Hi guys. I have great news for everyone here who has bothered to stay with me, commented on my posts and updates, and even reached out to me. My husband and I are divorced now. It took a while, but the court expedited our divorce process since this was a bit of an emergency for me. I also have full custody of my son now, and I don't think I'll ever have to see him or any of his family again, which is something I'm so grateful for. As far as I know, Kim is still in rehab for her mental issues or whatever, and my husband's probably going to be facing time for everything he's done. I'm going to therapy with my son to undo all the damage that he and his family have done to our mental health. We're also going on a mother-son trip soon to cheer the little guy up, and I couldn't be happier about how things turned out. It was rough for a while, but this is a new chapter of my life now, and I'm excited for what the future holds for me.